FD Signifier, the homie from Culture United, cultural paragon. Um, I like to react to his hip hop opinion videos sometimes, and this one I think is specifically, yeah, hip hop has an age problem, and I think it's about the old people. A lot of the hip hop is coming out right now is from old people, and I believe he's going to position that as an issue, and it might be. And I think I fit into that interestingly, as Catboy Ray said earlier. So let's check out Hip Hop Has an Age Problem, Kinda, from FD Signifier.
A few weeks ago, the Clips released their fifth studio album, Let God Sort 'Em Out, and their first album in nearly 15 years to critical and commercial acclaim. And after a week or two of discourse, I made a video about how I had mixed feelings about the fact that arguably the most critically acclaimed, attention-grabbing rap album of the year was made by two men older than me. That video never made it to YouTube. And it didn't make it for mostly good reasons. A lot of what I had to say.
I'm curious before we even get started with this, and then y'all can answer while he's talking. Do y'all think that it's a problem that the most impactful album was made by older people? I don't think it's a problem. I think it's symptomatic of a few different things, but I don't think it's a problem at all, personally. But I'm curious to see what y'all think too in the chat.
In this video, I'm going to low-key repeat in this one, but right after that video was finished, I saw a video from my problematic nephew Dom where he continued his smoke demon phase toward the generation before him, agreeing with my overall opinion, but also adding some things to the story that I knew I wanted to touch on, and I didn't know if I touched on perfectly. Before I could add anything to the video, I ended up taking a trip to LA for some business and ended up connecting with who I would say is the godfather of modern hip hop journalism and content creation, the Company Man.
G.E. Rard in the chat said needed a definition for impact, and to me, I would say just the album that's dominating the cultural discourse at the moment, the one that everyone's talking about. And that because we're in the streaming era, the one that everyone's talking about also tends to be the one that everybody's listening to, since you don't have to pay anything to listen to it. And if it's the one that everybody's talking about, everybody's going to want to have an opinion on it. So that's what I think is meant by impact, like what's dominating the discourse and what is garnering the most attention in the current moment how I interpret that word in its context.
And my conversation with him really helped me see that my initial take was inadequate. So the following is a result of my thoughts influenced by two, what I would say, powerful voices in hip hop criticism from relatively opposing sides from the generational and artistic divide. And using those angles, I want to discuss why I think we're at a pivotal crossroads for hip hop and music culture in general. So let's talk about Let God Sort 'Em Out and why that album is so interesting, but also alarming. Hip hop has always been an art form that reflected the energy and attitudes of America's and eventually the world's young people. In fact, I remember vividly as a teenager joking with my friends about how weird it was gonna be when someone like Snoop Dogg got old and was still trying to rap. And mind you, old rappers are definitely doing weird shit right now. But it's not necessarily the music that's weird. In fact, the last half decade has proven that old rappers can actually still provide the genre with amazing work. Nas went on a generational run coming out of COVID that rivals anything he's ever done as an artist. Jay Electronica oddly gave the world his first album in his early 40s after over a decade of waiting. Artists like A$AP Rock, Billy Woods.
He said, "Oh, Woods! Shout out to Woods." Did he say A$AP Rock? A$AP
and even Killer Mike have all given the world numerous excellent projects in the last few years, while all in their mid to late 40s. And of course, probably the first to show that
shout out to Woods and Kenny Siegel though
this was possible was Jay-Z.
Shout out to Killer Mike
back
too.
In 2017 at 444 when he was 48 years old. Now, one difference is the fact that unlike a lot of other old rappers, the Clips are still rapping about selling drugs, being rich, and killing people. And I love it. We all loved it. It's great. And if you think about it, it's no more relatable to a person like me when I was younger than it is when I'm older. So it's just good, fun entertainment. But also in between those drug bars, we get amazing moments about aging with hip hop and in the spotlight, gaining perspective through experience, losing parents. All this to say, as much as I love him, Andre 3000, you are wrong. There is a lot of room for older people in hip hop to.
Yeah, I always thought that Andre 3000 positioning was sort of BS. I remember taking that very personally. In fact, like, because I felt like that was the whole, I don't know, part of my whole mission statement was sort of trying to expand what people expect from hip hop, which would naturally include the perspectives of people who have grown up in this culture and aged. And you know, I think the perspective that older people making hip hop is somehow irrelevant or less substantive, it's like similar to saying like an older person can't write good books or an older person can't direct good movies. Yeah, I don't know. I think that there's something inherently reductive about assuming that somebody who's an artist in an art form can't get better or improve their craft with age. And that's just foundationally, let alone the perspective that gets added when somebody has added life experience. And I think that's part of what we're seeing bearing out too. I think that, like, to some degree with some of these artists, people have grown up with them and they want to see how these people develop. And I think in that sense, it's a little bit easier to get attention if you've been around for a while, if you're more of a recognizable cultural icon than it is for some of these young kids who have a lot of people in their audience, but it's a little bit harder for them to get a foothold in the national conversation. Probably because they're not as recognizable yet. People haven't invested in them culturally yet, or the people that have are just young people.
Ray, another hip hop journalism elder, said as much a while back. However, I still have concerns when I see the rollout and reception for Let God Sort 'Em Out, not in terms of its success, but in terms of galvanizing the culture, drawing attention, and driving trends and conversations, being a moment in hip hop in a way that I don't know if it's happened enough in the last decade or so. Because while I think there's plenty of room for older rappers in hip hop, any genre of art that is dominated by people in their 40s going into their 50s, especially a genre that used to be driven by younger people. The aforementioned Nas, for example, was 19 when he made Illmatic, and the aforementioned Andre 3000 along with Big Boy, they were both 19 when Outkast released Southern Playlist of Cadillac Funky Music. If the only people really engage with hip hop culture as a
read and rap, I want to comment on this comment in the chat. What I got from the Andre comments point was more so he didn't feel like he wanted to rap about the same things guys like Snoop, Wayne, and etc. were talking about. Not necessarily there's nothing to talk about with age. Maybe I got the wrong impression. It seemed like he didn't care for the content of the raps. I understand that too, but I think it's problematic that he thinks he had to do that, because that to me is the foundational problem, is that somebody who is as good as him, who has seen as much as him, has done as much as him culturally, would feel like what would be expected of him was to do the same thing that those guys do when he has all the choices in the world. And it's like, that's the frustrating thing for me, is that he didn't see himself as having those sorts of options when there's absolutely no reason he doesn't. Like, he could literally do whatever he wants, as seen by his choices in genre that he has followed, but he could bring that same freedom to hip hop. And I think everybody would welcome it. Everybody would be excited about it.
Music culture and not a drama culture, and we'll get to that later. If those people are all pushing 40 and older, that means hip hop is dying, or at least that it's not in a healthy place. As much as I love Kendrick Lamar's current reign of dominance, I don't know if there's ever been a time where the biggest star in hip hop has been in their late 30s. Drake's most dominant run in the 2010s, he was in his mid-20s. Kanye and Wayne before him were in their mid and late 20s. Jay-Z was maybe the first to do this in his 30s in the late 90s during his most dominant run, but he had been around since his mid-20s. And before that, Biggie, Tupac, Lauryn Hill, Missy Elliott, Run DMC, LL Cool J, and so on. These were all very
Thank you
young
for the
men
sub,
and women
Pathfinder.
becoming superstars and affecting significant change and impact on hip hop culture, making iconic work at that time. It's not that it's not happening now, is that the way it's happening is not where it needs to be. Now, I want to be clear that I'm using the word iconic for a reason, because I'm about to give maybe my hottest take in a while to point out a paradox happening in hip hop. I'm not saying that there are no young rappers making good music right now in 2025 or in the past decade or so. In fact, I think that hip hop music as a whole is the best it's ever been, and this includes younger rappers. Now, I know this is something that people my age would disagree with, but that's because they're probably less locked in than I am, and y'all know I'm not nearly as locked in as I used to be once upon a time. And part of that is because there's honestly too much good hip hop coming out these days. There's a new rap girl with a ratchet banger every 3 weeks. There's a new Griselda project every 2 months. There's an entire genre of female MCs making more purist boom bap adjacent music like Chica and Lil Sims and No Name. There's entire catalogs of good music from younger artists like Denzel Curry or Vince Staples that I don't get to spend enough time with. Because the reason is one of y'all are bringing to my attention someone like Mike, who I haven't listened to yet because I don't know when I'm going to do that, because I just heard the new McKinley Dixon project, and that is to me my favorite thing that's came out all year. And then I find out that dude has 5 other albums that I've never heard, and this is all while Let God Sort 'Em Out is still in heavy rotation. If you're my age and you're paying attention and you're honest, you have to admit there simply wasn't this much high quality stuff coming out in the 90s, because the way we consumed hip hop, the people that controlled how hip hop was released, would not have allowed it. But that's also part of the issue. Hip hop music is in a second renaissance right now, but hip hop culture is kind of trash. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Many of them have to do with the mediums through which we consume music. Streaming has changed the nature of engaging with the music and has also exacerbated how exploitative being a rapper is, as rappers make even less money off their music today than they did 30 years ago. Where they were getting at least pennies off each record, and now it's a percentage of a penny off each stream. And this has led to a big difference in how rappers might be motivated to make music. And you know what, I'm gonna be lazy and just like add a section from that vaulted video here, because it's basically the same shit. But even going back to those stars, the Doechis, the Glorillaz, the Megs, etc., are any of them willing to put in the effort to sit and really build a project akin to Chromacopia or Let God Sort 'Em Out, or maybe whatever Jid and Joey Badass are doing? To be fair, does the even culture demand that from them, or is this just an outdated old head concept? Is it old head of me? I'm asking this genuinely, to want more artists to sit down for a couple of years and really work on building a project, because I understand that that's not the optimal way.
Now, I know he just presented this clip out of context, but I mean, so the only Doechii project I've ever sat and listened to was the Alligator Bites joint, and to me that felt very intricately and intentionally put together in a way that stands with those other albums that he presented. So I don't know if I understand the ask there. And I haven't heard a Glorilla project, and I haven't heard a Megan project in a long time. But I mean, the way I took in that Alligator Bites project, it sounded as crafted as any of the other stuff that he's talking about. I mean, and when you talk about somebody like Tyler's stuff is always like a thing apart, because he is such a madman as a rapper and a producer in a way that like really nobody else is, and nobody has been since Kanye. So I feel like he's a person apart anyway. But when you look, I mean, like I feel like Doechii's album was as put together as like a GNX, but I don't know. I guess I would like to have had more context on what he meant with this particular point, but maybe he'll give it.
To be a musician in 2025. Like, I don't know if any rapper has had a bigger 18 to 24 month period than Glorilla. I feel like ever since she popped up a couple of years ago, she's basically had a top 10, top 20 hit every 2 to 3 months, and somehow she came out with not one but 2 albums in 2024, or maybe they're mixtapes. I honestly don't know, and that's kind of my thing. It doesn't feel like it mattered that she came out with 2 albums in 1 year. and that the albums themselves didn't really make like as singular projects. They didn't make huge splashes because she's still releasing big hits every couple of months. What would incentivize her to go away from that strategy and like let her wave calm down for a second and legitimately stay in the studio for a big album, hype it for months, make one big splash all at once, when she can basically just keep ruling TikTok and Instagram and whatever else with these great songs? And this is where my conversations with Company Man and Dom come in. What I began to ask is, where are the huge cultural shifting moments in the form of music coming from younger parts of hip hop? While there's still good music happening in hip hop, the stars don't seem to shine as bright. I looked at a list of the 20 hottest rappers in hip hop from 2022, and a bunch of the people on that list had already low-key fallen off, like Jack Harlow and Sexy Red. A few were people I didn't know anything about, like V's and Cash Cobain and Ken Carson. And you might say, well, that's because I'm not locked in. And to an extent, maybe. But if they were really huge stars, it would be impossible for me not to know who they are.
There's a few. That's. I think that's problematic logic. Wow. Like Ken Carson is a really huge artist. Now, the way Ken Carson's music is marketed, that's not going to naturally come to you the same way that the artist that he's probably used to hearing. Like, I don't think Ken Carson's necessarily got a radio hit. I don't think, but Ken Carson's really big. I don't know. I wonder if it's fair to expect an artist like that to become somebody who you hear about in the ways that you've heard about people traditionally, or if at some point it's on the older hip hop fan that if they want to be tapped in to just like seek stuff out, like, because you don't have to dig too far to find Ken Carson music. Like it's around. He's got a lot of fans. He's got a lot of content around. It's just like, I don't know. I feel like part of what's always been this unspoken thing about rap music and how rappers became rap stars was a lot of it had to do with the marriage between the labels and rap radio, these two corporate entities basically, and how they interacted. And they would sort of not conspire, but the machinery was set up for them to serve artists to sort of a monolithic rap audience, and then that audience would sort of choose what they rock with and what they didn't. And I feel like that machinery isn't running some of these younger artists through that the same way they used to, but they're still becoming huge. They're still gaining masses of fans. And I think part of that is about TikTok. Part of that is based on the different way that young folks are consuming music nowadays. So, like, I don't know if these younger artists are ever going to be positioned in the exact same way that traditionally rap stars have been rolled out. So I don't know. There's a question there. There's a question there on, like, if somebody's trying to be hip to what's going on with younger cats, is there some responsibility on their end to put in some effort to find out what's going on? And not, I mean, I think it'd be a little odd to expect 40-year-old dudes to just constantly be hip, because the music's not, it's probably not really for you. But in the same vein, I don't necessarily think it's fair to discount them because you haven't heard of them, if that makes sense, because you're not supposed to hear of them because they're not being marketed to you. But I don't think that takes away from their successes, I guess what I'm trying to say.
Bona fide huge stars, but they were also mostly women like Meg, Glorilla, Lotto, Doja Cat, Doechii, and keep a pin in that because that's important. So aside from maybe Playboy Carti and Lil Uzi Vert, I don't think anyone on that list has truly done anything to deeply impact hip hop culture on a large scale. There's good music, there's big hits, but there's no big galvanizing culture shifting moments. And as I showed with Glorilla in that previous segment, I don't think there's even a real reason or like force to make that a thing. As big of a year that Glorilla had, I don't think her presence right now compares to what Nicki Minaj did with Pink Friday 15 years ago. And I was old then. I wasn't locked in then, but I could tell from looking at the youth and from looking at the culture that something was happening when she came out. And it's not the same. People now are just satisfied with small mini waves in different pockets of fandom. And that's not the worst thing, because that also does mean we get better, more niche content. But it does mean that hip hop is lacking star power, or at least young star power, which is concerning, because that's what drives the medium and the culture forward into the future beyond when I'll have any influence. There's a lot of obvious aspects of why this is happening: late capitalism and enshittification of music streaming and how we consume music. But the company man added something else that I definitely want to touch on to oversimplify our conversation. Justin, I invite you to add your commentary to this when you can. He pointed out that essentially Gen Z doesn't have the best critics who are also popular and influential in the culture in the same way that me and him and others above us and older than us were while we were consuming hip hop. The reality is that the popular figures who promote and discuss music that is Gen Z oriented are, for lack of a better word, pretty shallow. So before you take offense to that, young people, let me explain. Back in my day, hip hop journalism was a real thing. That's where Justin came from. Teray, Sway, Funkmaster Flex, Joe Claire, Fab Five Freddy, Heather B, and a bunch of other names that a lot of you are like, who the fuck is this nigga talking about? But if you're around my age, that was a little nostalgic, hit to the brain. These were the talking heads of my time. And while they weren't as in-depth or as analytical as maybe a Justin and many of my peers are today, they were still seriously engaged with criticism and discussion of hip hop. They inspired debate and discourse and admiration, and they were tastemakers that grew the culture through funneling the biggest stars to our eyes and brains and making sure that when their music happened, when their music came out, that we all sat with it instead of just consuming it as content. And to be blunt, this is not something that a Kai Cenat or Aiden Ross or XQC or academics is doing right now. In our conversation, Company Man brought up this conflict between XQC and Anthony Fantano. And, Anthony Fantano didn't like Jack Boys 2, and he did like Let God Sort Him Out, right? And his reasoning was that Jack Boys 2 felt a little shallow and uninspired. And the Company Man pointed out that whether or not you like Jack Boys 2, if you have an analytical stance on hip hop and that music specifically, you could illustrate multiple positive angles that could be made about Jack Boys 2 that would be a solid argument against what Fantano presented. So in a dream world where Anthony Fantano and the Company Man have a conversation about those albums, anyone who witnessed that would be richer from the experience of seeing two informed and experienced hip hop critics sharing an intellectual conversation where they may have disagreed. However, XQC is no Justin Hunt. SQC basically went full idiocracy on us and said, Unga Bunga, words are hard, let's vibe. It was really embarrassing. And it's incredibly embarrassing that somehow this guy is a prominent voice for Gen Z on anything, let alone hip hop. Say what you want about Anthony Fantano, but one thing you have to admit is that he's a thoughtful critic with an informed perspective, even if you don't agree with it. And Fantano has millions of subscribers across multiple platforms. I have 1 million subs across multiple platforms. Justin Hunt is pushing 400K. Curtis King is over 300K. And the hip hop podcast world is dominated by people like Joe Buttons and others who are born from the same cloth as he is. And then there's the traditional hip hop media entities like Ebro and Sway. All of those things are still around. But all of us combined pale in comparison to giants like Kai Cenat, especially when it comes to getting the attention of Gen Z. And as hard as this is to believe for those of you around my age watching, Kai Cenat is the biggest and most influential figure in hip hop right now, and definitely for the youth. And no, minimal shade to Kai. He's not who you should go for any type of substantive hip hop journalism. He's not a tastemaker. He's not.
I have so many thoughts. My goodness. And I don't know, maybe this is something that I need to sit down and write something out about and sort of organize my thoughts around. But I don't know if I agree with this entire position. I feel like this entire positioning is sort of Fox Freeman, thanks for the gifted. This entire position, like, okay, I guess what he's presenting is that part of the issue with younger artists being properly propelled to stardom in the way that he's expecting is that the the machinery for criticism for younger artists isn't developed, or that they're not approaching it from an analytical standpoint. And I think the way that I'm seeing it is more like there's I think we're witnessing a sort of fork in the road in terms of the music that's coming out and the stars that are being made. Where like there are young stars. I don't know if what the young stars are making or their fans necessarily care about analysis of it. Like it seems like this perspective represents a sort of old media sort of understanding that like, oh, in order for there to be these new stars, they have to be treated by analysts and critics and media pundits the way that artists were when we were growing up, where there were these trusted voices that were able to put things in context and present them. And in a sea of music, these people, these journalists would point you to who was dope. Like the Source magazine would give 5 mics to the dope shit and everybody would check that out. I think that just represents such an old way of consumption and an old way of engagement that I'm not sure even applies to these young kids. Like, we didn't grow up with an app that was scrolled, that we scrolled, that was attuned to things that we like because we scrolled it so much, that would just constantly show us music that maybe we would like. Like, we didn't grow up in that. Like, in some ways, the middleman is gone for the kids. Like, there's just music constantly being made. The labels are paying to get these things positioned on TikTok rather than paying to get them reviewed by magazines or put on Rap City or whatever other vehicles that we were engaging with at the time. And they're going straight to them. And they're either liking it, they either like what they hear and they press the button where they can see what's playing, and that'll take them straight to Spotify and they can add it to their liked songs, or they just scroll right past it. And that is working for them. Like that is working just fine for them. There are artists with millions of monthly listeners who, like, I'm surprised all the time when I hear about how big some of these kids' audiences are, but they're using an entire different machinery to reach people. And then they get booked on festivals and they do shows and they're all sold out and there's 10,000 people jumping up and down knowing every word. Like, I think that the culture might be splitting a little bit. And I don't think the new music that's coming out, I don't think the new artists, I don't think they need the old machines. I don't think so. I don't think it's necessary for the way that they are connecting with their fans. It's a whole different world. And I'm not sure that they need this.
Providing criticism or analysis, it's mostly just antics and jokes at best. The closest thing to substantive commentary for Gen Z is probably Sean C., who's barely Gen Z because he's 29 now. And Sean C. has a large following, but all the other younger-oriented content media entities that I can think of that are also youth-oriented are more like Kai Cenat. That whole streaming world, while I get that it's, entertainment and... Well, I don't get it. I don't get streaming. I don't get that world of streaming. I don't think it's directly a problem, but I know it's not serving hip hop criticism in any meaningful way. It's just a lot of young dudes having fun, which I get it. The people that are Gen Z that are doing serious commentary are much, much smaller and they're not getting nearly the same level of attention. I mentioned Dom, who along with Four and with the Potty Mouth podcast, and they're just starting to get traction the last couple of years. Then there's people like Top 5 Troy, who I think is pretty small. Dupli is another hip hop creator that's made some good stuff and gotten a lot of views. But beyond him, I can't think of too many hip hop channels that are doing actual journalism as opposed to just making hip hop drama commentary. And I get why those channels do numbers, because it seems like more hip hop fans are interested in drama than music. And I get why, because this generation.
And I would tell you that, and mind you, a lot of my perspective comes from being who I am as an artist, being who I am as a pundit, and also being who I am as a parent to a 16-year-old who is deeply entrenched in music consumption. And it's putting me on to things all the time. That point about the drama is interesting, but something that's been pointed out to me recently from my son is that a lot of times there are artists who are known for their antics and for their drama, and they might do really well on YouTube, but a lot of times that doesn't actually translate to their monthly listeners on Spotify. Like a lot of times people are following for the antics, following for the story, following for the narrative, but they don't necessarily go listen to the music. So even within those vehicles in which the youth are consuming music right now, like there's different pathways developing and how these artists are becoming big. And some of them are just becoming big, even though they are rappers, they're becoming big as personalities. Like a lot of those people that Adam 22 talks to over and over again, a lot of them have huge audiences. And even though they make music, the audience isn't coming to them for music. The audience is coming to them for their personality and their antics. So the drama thing is becoming a whole separate beast of its own.
First images of hip hop commentary in the last decade were guys like DJ Vlad and Adam 22. That said, I can't just pin it explicitly on a failure within Gen Z, because that's our responsibility. Don points out something I've complained about for years, which is that the old guard of hip hop tastemakers are struggling with aging out of relevancy. They're struggling with change, and for the longest, too many of us have been openly hostile and dismissive of what the modern era of hip hop is about. And the consequences of this has been a severe lack of carrying on tradition. And by tradition, I don't necessarily mean a specific style of rap, but I mean the essence of what hip hop culture was supposed to be. Recognize that hip hop has always been compromised. Like from day one, go back to my Kid and Play video, as soon as the money came to rap music stopped being a radical art form. But there were at least always counter forces within the culture resisting commodification, resisting selling out, and staking a claim to that essence the entire time. And that's mostly gone now. Now the biggest, most influential faces in hip hop culture are doing commercials for Target in the middle of Target being boycotted by black people. So please believe you had issues with Snoop Dogg and Nelly performing for Trump like early this year. I can't wait to see what Kai Cenat and his homies are doing 20 years from now for, President Baby Hitler that we'll have by then, because that's a whole other conversation. I see people like Aiden Ross and SQC and worst of all academics garnering massive audiences and getting cosigns even by legitimate hip hop tastemakers. And you could never have been a serious figure in hip hop doing the things they do. And back in my day, you could never have been a serious.
One more thing here, because this is another thing that my son put me onto that's really hilarious to me, is that within, and mind you, that this is one kid's perspective, but I don't think he's alone in this. And this is based on, YouTube videos I watched with him too, where other people are saying this. A lot of these kids think Kai Cenat's music taste are fraudulent. They think that Kai Cenat is like, he is like falsely vaunted as a tastemaker. There's like all of these videos of Kai supposedly trying to rap along with songs and not doing it well, and a lot of the kids think he's a fraud. It's all funny and it's all very layered.
Figure in hip hop doing some of the things they do. In the 90s and 2000s, coming out and saying that you were a fan of Bush 1 or 2 or Ronald Reagan would have had you completely excised from the culture. But now we have our OGs and new age tastemakers for hip hop overtly supporting Donald Trump. How have many of these so-called tastemakers covered these black women stars? I think you already know the answer. There's a world where Meg and Doechii and others feel bigger than they do even right now if there was a hip hop media landscape more amenable for engaging with female stars. And don't get me wrong, hip hop has never been great with women from jump, but compare the way that hip hop culture received Lil' Kim and Lauryn Hill and Foxy Brown and Nicki Minaj a couple decades ago versus how people like academics and Aiden Ross treat Doechii and Meg Thee Stallion. And here's the thing. Regardless of how people my age feel about the state of hip hop culture right now, and if you feel like the youth and Gen Z and soon to be Gen Alpha is fucking up the culture, that's still our fault. And that's because for the longest time, a lot of us have been openly hostile to anything young people have been doing with hip hop. We have been incredibly uninviting to large chunks of their generation. When Kanye dropped 808s and Heartbreak, we shitted on it heavy, said it wasn't hip hop, said we were mad at Kanye for it. But that album is.
My position on that is that it doesn't even matter what we thought. That's my position on it. Is that it was going to have the impact it had on the culture regardless. That's where I also get oppositional in this kind of take, because I think that like this gets back into that gatekeeping conversation where there's a bunch of folks that are like, oh, we should have gate kept hip hop better, and then all of this stuff wouldn't have happened. And this is almost the reverse opinion, right? Where it's like, oh, we should have been more accepting, accommodating, or engaging with new stuff as it was happening. I think we retroactively, as old heads, give ourselves so much more cultural power than what we really had. I think we do that all the time. We love to look back in rose-colored glasses and be like, oh, well, if we had done this, then things would have been different. I don't think that we're ever really honest enough about the influence of the cultural, the corporate machines that put out these artists and put out this music, and how aligned they are, and how a lot of our opinions ultimately didn't matter. Like I really, that's where I sit. I don't think that our acceptance or rejection of an artist like Kanye's pivots into different type of sounds, I don't think it really ultimately mattered either way, personally.
Clearly today, one of the most influential records hip hop has seen in the last 2 decades. When Lil Yachty said he didn't know much about Biggie because he was literally born a couple of months after Biggie died, we crucified him for years for that and wrote him off as if it wasn't an elder's responsibility to sit him down and play Biggie for him, because that's what adults are supposed to do with the youth. So when you look at the way we've engaged and managed those types of conflicts, a schism, a divide between the young and the old was inevitable. We are responsible for carrying on tradition, and we didn't do that. And like thinking about that, I have to show love to Kendrick Lamar, because even though while there's criticism for him connecting with an artist like Playboi Carti, I said then, and I better recognize now, that his goal was just to introduce a generation of fans to a style of hip hop that they haven't been involved with or invited to. Those kids were not here to listen to Good Kid, Mad City 13 years ago. Yes, Good Kid, Mad City came out 13 years ago. There's other factors we can't dismiss, right? Like, this generation has been the subject of one of the most aggressive anti-intellectualism campaigns that humanity has ever seen. Critical thinking and media literacy was basically taken out of schools deliberately by George W. Bush and Barack Obama. I'm gonna stay on that man's head until y'all understand the problem. I'm sorry if that makes you upset. I was a teacher during that time frame, and all of us knew something was wrong when we realized that absolutely nothing had changed in the way that we were supposed to be teaching when he became president. But even with that, it's still a problem that the intellectual wing of hip-hop media for people under 30 seems severely underdeveloped.
Cypher Sis asked a great question in the chat. Whose responsibility is it to bridge the gap between the elders and the upcoming? I think so the problem with that is that I think the real responsibility is like in individual households to do that, right? But even with that, right? Let's say every household took that responsibility seriously, right? And was all about bridging the gap, all about engaging with the youth, all about exposing the youth to things that were relevant to them in their time, and engaging with what's relevant to the kids. Now, let's say everybody was doing that. I think what we still have to understand is what opposes that is a giant corporate machine. So like, you have the time that you have with your youth. Let's say it's a child of yours. You have all the time you have with them, which is a few hours a day typically if like you got school age kids. But then the entire time they're in the world, the entire time they're on their phone away from that. Like, they're receiving corporate messages that reflect societal values that in some ways are beyond our control, and that can be part of the conversation too. But it's just that we have to understand that that's the conflict, that's the tension point. You know what I'm saying? Like, we want to raise the next generation to be we want to pass on our values to the next generation. But we also have to understand that there's an entire world happening outside full of things we can't control. And they have to exist in that world, right? They have to relate to other people their age. They make their own choices based on all of this information that's constantly coming in. So whereas that household discussion is very powerful, that corporate reflection and messaging of the values of society is also very strong. And, you know, I think ultimately it's a capitalism thing, and we kind of have to figure that out on a societal level in general. But that gets into, you know, something far beyond what the scope of what we could handle in terms of passing on the values of hip hop and music.
And I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg situation. Is it that there's not enough real critics, or is it that there's not an audience for it? That's hard to say, but I do know that it's for everyone that loves hip hop, young and old, to put in the work needed to fix it. Because when I'm 50, while it might be interesting to hear Social Security retirement bars from Nas or Jay-Z, I imagine it will make me sleep better at night knowing that some new little young nigga is taking over the game in a way that I had never seen before in my lifetime. That's what a healthy hip hop culture looks like. It's not the Clips. As much as I love that album being the face of the game right now, it should be some new nigga that we don't know nothing about doing.
But the face of the game to who? The face of the game to us, yes. Not the face of the game to my kids' generation. They don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about that. They don't give a shit about the Clips. They have a whole other thing going on. And that's the whole thing. It's like, when that person arises who is changing the game in a way that they never imagined, you're not going to see it coming because it's not going to go through the same channels of what you're used to. It's going to happen in another realm, and maybe they emerge and cross over in a way, or maybe the whole thing just goes in a different direction you never see coming.
Something we never even imagined, except Playboy Card. I'm sorry. Just give me that one. Just give me that one. Again, pulling from my combo with Company Man, our generation is the first to age with hip hop. So us in our 40s and 50s, we're doing this for the first time, and we clearly don't have a blueprint. But we do have an example of how it can go wrong. Because when you look at rock music, that's not where I want hip hop to be. Those of you younger than me may not realize it, but there was a time back in my day that rock music was a significantly more relevant genre of music.
100%. That Motley Crue? Yeah. I love me some Motley Crue.
Mainstream, anything.
What's that, Kickstart My Heart?
182 and System of a Down and Metallica or Aerosmith and all these other folks were just as likely to be on your TV screens and just as likely to have the equivalent of trending sounds or whatever back then. And right now, almost all of that is very niche and barely gets a blip compared to hip hop and pop and, I don't know, Afrobeat or whatever else. And there's a ton of reasons why rock is invisible from wide commercial appeal, but it couldn't have helped that the old bars of rock and metal and punk acted just how some of us are acting right now, dismissive, territorial, and arrogant toward those who are supposed to inherit the culture. So unless you want this thing of ours to die with us the way it died with rock, we need to be putting in work to nurture and develop the things we love amongst the younger generation. And don't tell me they don't want to listen. That's part of the process. Neither did we, and we didn't because the people above us did not respect us.
I do know who Two Hollis is.
Even in the 90s, there were black radio stations that didn't play hip hop. Y'all remember people like Larry Blackmon, the lead singer from Cameo? This guy had the nerve to say that rappers look silly. So remember how that felt. Consider what you wanted from your elders once upon a time and give that to the youth. If not for their sake, then for the sake of hip hop. Because we all talk about a shift, right? And I'm still 50-50 on whether or not this shift is really like a thing. Because I can't believe it's a real positive change for hip hop if it's only being appreciated and engaged with by people who won't be here in a decade to carry that tradition on. I can't see it as a real win for the culture until it's joined by artists half our age and celebrated in the same way. Because otherwise, it's not a shift, it's a last hurrah. If you made it this far in the video, there's a chance you might want to hear more from that other video that's never coming to YouTube. I do talk a little bit more about clips. I get into a bunch of other stuff. For the sub. I can't even think about it at this point. But like I said, that video is never coming to YouTube, but you can watch it in its original form on my streaming service.
Nebula.
Let's talk about today's sponsor, Nebula.
All right, we ain't talking about today's sponsor, Nebula. But shout out to FD, always with the engaging and thoughtful content. I mean, that might have been the video from him I probably disagree with the most, but I think we just have different perspectives on the true power that hip hop culture discourse holds in the face of what I think is a beast that we don't always completely talk about how effective it is, how well it works, and how much of a stranglehold it has on at least the hip hop consumption that we grew up with. There's just a stranglehold on it, and I think there's a different sort of stranglehold on how that machine serves up music to the youth. Like, you know, as much as TikTok is a place for music discovery, a lot of the music that's being discovered is by artists that have resources, is by artists who are on labels. But it's a whole different type of machinery, and it's already well oiled, and it's already happening there in a way that's like completely apart from our discourse, completely apart from what we pay attention to. I'm always trying to stay hip to it, but it's impossible, honestly. It's a tough thing to wrap your head around, especially because in 99% of the cases, the music doesn't appeal to me at all. But those artists are becoming huge. Look up video of a Rolling Loud and see 20,000 people out there knowing every word, jumping up and down to some artists that you've never heard of. Maybe like the top 5 or 6 artists on a bill that big that you never heard of. You know, like there's a whole nother machinery happening. There's a whole nother value system emerging. And I do think I'm not a fan of a lot of it, to be honest. But I think that this culture in its current point of developing is starting to fray. It's starting to split. It's starting to compartmentalize into different levels, different layers, different categories of influence. I think we're headed to a place where there isn't just one hip hop culture. There's a few, and I think that's good. Ultimately, like that's kind of like all a person like me has ever wanted, for there to be different silos within this that are all substantial, all valid, all have their fans. Because I think that was really what happened to rock music in my eyes. Is that rock music was allowed to develop. Rock music was allowed to become art rock and bluegrass and punk and grunge. And a lot of those are still healthy silos today. Like it's not, you know, it's not one dominant style like it was with hair metal. I think it grew and it changed. Now, I think another reason that rock isn't as prominent as it used to be is because the money in music is so bad that it just makes a lot less sense to start a band now, to be honest, because you're splitting money 4 ways plus a manager. And remember, we're talking about fractions of a penny on Spotify. So I think the people who start bands now is because they love it, versus it used to really be a way to be a rock star and have a lifestyle and try to live your dreams. I think it's a lot harder now. And I think that's the reason you see a lot less rock bands these days. It's just not like, you know, corporate wise, it's just not as good of an investment. But, you know, everything's growing and changing. And there's a lot of music out there for everybody. And this was a good talk. Like and subscribe, homie, friend. It's free. Stop playing.